Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Rich Veal. I work in the communications and change management part of the Willis Towers Watson business, but after the previous speaker, I'm going to reinvent that job and say I'm in charge of behaviour change, because a lot of what we want to focus on for the next 20 minutes is how we create a complete system that allows well-being to flourish. Because I've heard a few speakers today talk about the fact that just focusing on initiatives and tactical delivery is not going to change behaviour. We need to be in the behaviour change business. So my colleague and I, Benjamin, we're going to talk about big picture and we're going to talk about specifics. So we just want to give you some practical guidance in terms of the research that we've done and the techniques that we use where we observe organisations achieving true behaviour change and creating the right conditions for well-being to thrive. So the first thing I want to touch on is the fact that we have an opportunity now more than ever to humanise the workplace, to actually create a much better connection with human beings, with people, as a result of technology. The difficulty is that we often fall into the trap of thinking that advances in technology put us further away from each other or dehumanise the workplace. We need to think the other way around. We need to think about how technology allows us to make better connections, understand people better, and get into proper behaviour change facilitated by technology. It's a really important sort of inflection point that we're at right now. So we're seeing organisations in kind of both camps, where they're thinking about technology allowing you to do less with people and spend less time with them individually so they can do it for themselves. That doesn't mean you disconnect from them. That means you get closer to them as a result. So we're freed up by technology to have better relationships with the human beings that we work with. That's a good outcome. But we have a responsibility to make that happen. Now, there's a lot behind that. Why is that important now? It's facilitated by technology, but it's not just because of technology. So there's several aspects to this that I'm observing. Human beings are highly complex. So traditionally, in our world, it used to be enough to manage a process and deliver information and then expect people to read the information and do stuff. That is a very one-dimensional way of thinking about it. We now have the ability to do much more and actually change behaviour by anticipating how people will be motivated to actually change and do things. So now we need to move from traditional information and initiative provision to effecting behaviour change. The other thing is that people expect an experience now. So as consumers, as people outside work, we seek experiences, we are judgmental of experiences that we have as consumers. If the experience doesn't work for us, we go to an experience that is better. So how does that brand make us feel? How easy is it interact with? How well does that brand understand me as an individual? So we are providing experiences. That puts pressure on the employer to level up, to provide an experience at work. I heard a previous speaker talking about the snowflake generation, that being a derogatory term, and actually they're right, and older generations might be needing to catch up, that it's a good thing to challenge. If it's not good enough, it needs to be better. So we're under pressure to provide experiences. And the other factor is the rise of the individual. So there's a lot more focus on the valuing individuality. So there's a lot of cultural change that's been happening in the last 20 or 30 years about people feeling they have the right to be happy as an individual. They have the right to be respected and recognised as an individual. And if you look at the world of marketing, many years ago we used to talk about demographic segmentation. And recently we've been talking about personas and understanding groups of people's aspirations. We're now in the realm of segment of one. So we have a technological ability to recognise each and every individual person as a consumer, as an employee, as a mixture of both. So technology is now an enabler for us to engage with a segment of one, which is very exciting, but it's very complex and it's very interesting. So that's the backdrop for what we call employee experience. And for me, organisations that look at a complete strategy of providing a top-to-bottom, left-to-right, full employee experience, are creating the conditions for the success of well-being. They're creating the environment within which well-being can thrive. And I think that's extremely important, because otherwise we're dealing with well-being and employee engagement in a very tactical way, which will have a short-term effect, but not a sustained effect. So, will the slide change? Yes, it will change. That's all very well, Rich, but is it worth doing? So we really believe in this, but we wanted to absolutely check that there was a commercial benefit from doing this, because otherwise it's an altruistic motive, which is laudable, but business isn't necessarily going to embrace it. So can we find an ROI connection between a strong employee experience and high-performing organizations? So we are an engagement measurement organization. We've spent many years looking at employee attitudes and employee happiness at work and engagement. I've always argued that's a symptom of a broader thing. So understand the broader thing through the symptoms that you're measuring. So what we undertook was a study of 10 million or so data points that we had across 500 or so organizations to figure out whether or not there's a correlation between high-performing organizations and the quality of the employee experience that they provide. And what we did was we took 30 of the top highest performing organizations from that 500, and we looked at how well they were delivering on sets of measures that relate to high quality employee experience. And we looked at how much you would get as a $1,000 investment return since 2002. If you'd invested $1,000 in that organization, in their shares, how much of a return would you get? And if you invested $1,000 in 2002 in that cohort of high-performing, high-functioning employee experience organizations, you get $9,000 today, compared to just investing it in the stock market return. And what's interesting is that even in downturns, the performance is sustained. When many organizations dip, in 2008, for example, almost everyone dipped. These organizations don't. They're resilient organizations. Now, we're not necessarily saying there's an absolute causal hard link between these things, but the evidence is very compelling that organizations that put effort into holistic employee experience approach seem to be higher performing, stronger organizations, which is really exciting, because it's really important that we're doing this on a rational as well as an emotional basis. So I think this is really exciting. So our challenge to employers is rethink to a whole system approach. Think about how you're delivering on an employee experience from every touch point that you have with the employee is an opportunity to make the employee experience stronger, which gives you a better chance of having successful well-being. Now, how that translates into action. So what this is a sort of overview of the dimensions that we see employee experience is broadly made up of. So these are very broad categories, and I would argue that well-being features in all of these categories. There's an element of well-being in helping people understand purpose and connection to purpose. Meaningfulness at work is extremely important in people's emotional well-being. So we encourage, under the purpose column, for organizations to put effort into helping people understand their personal connection with the purpose of the organization, for example. And then what we're doing is thinking about getting the essentials right at the base level, making sure that people understand the purpose before you worry necessarily about trying to inspire. If people don't understand what it is the organization is trying to achieve in their part in it, how can you inspire them? So we see organizations at the high-performing end are operating on the excellence level in these dimensions. They're inspiring people for what they do in their work. They're driving transformation, and they're ahead of the market. They've got a growth mindset, both in terms of financial and personal growth, and people have trust in the leadership. It's a mindset needed to succeed, and not many organizations reach that, but it's a worthy aspiration. And interestingly, in our study, the organizations that achieve this sustained excellence were not the largest, most well-known brands. It wasn't related necessarily to scale or high brand visibility. It was more related to consistency, strong connection with values. And it's not limited to sector. We found high-performing organizations right across sectors. The other element to all of this is employee involvement. So we talk about emphasis as well as a middle layer of getting this right. And this is about agency and dialogue with individuals. So if you think about how, when you're facing consumers as an organisation, you have a continual ongoing dialogue with consumers. There's a complete feedback loop that's always there. And consumer action and consumer engagement with your offering and your product is a constant equation. In the workplace, we have traditionally thought about it as a once a year or every quarter measure what has happened, rather than an ongoing dialogue. And that's been a bit one-dimensional. It's been things like fairly straightforward questionnaires that ask quite binary questions. But these days, we need to get into that always-on dialogue with employees to have a constant connection and involvement with the workforce, so that we're understanding how to respond, that they're involved in and part of that employee experience that builds almost as an organic thing. So, conscious we only have 20 minutes to talk, and I could talk about this all day, and I'm not going to. So I'm going to hand over to Benjamin, who's going to now talk about the more specific tactical things we do to achieve that.
Thanks, Rich. Hello, everyone. If you're anything like me, one of the things that you look for in this type of presentation is to learn something and to be engaged and inspired, but also to have something practical to take away. So this next part of our talk is, what are the steps that you can take to doing something about this? And there are two themes that I'm going to come back to that Rich has touched on. One is, what does it mean to treat people like consumers? And secondly, how can we use technology to really drive behavior change in our organizations? One of the pieces of research that we've undertaken at Willis Towers Watson demonstrates that about 70% of employees expect their organization to understand them in the same way that they are expected by their organization to understand their organization's customers. So I want you to understand me. And the best way to do that is to ask people what's important to them and what they value. And there are different techniques and tools that you can use to do this. One of the latest things that we've been using with clients is something called virtual focus groups. So this is an online platform where you can have a real-time conversation, and this is powered by artificial intelligence sitting underneath it. So rather than me simply sending out a survey to all of my people, I'd like to have a conversation. This appeals to the many people in our workplace today who want to have instant reaction, and they also want to see what their fellow colleagues are saying. So having an online discussion with people whereby you immediately segment the results, other people can see what their colleagues said and felt was important, allows you to have a real-time, powerful conversation and then create actionable insights. Now, one of the challenges when you ask people about not only well-being, but we're also looking at this more holistically. Rich talked about the employee experience. Some organizations talk about it in the context of total rewards. So well-being being one of the key elements alongside, your pay, your benefits, your career, and your well-being. One of the challenges when you ask people what they want and how they feel about these things is that there's a natural human emotional response. And typically people say, I want more and I want more money. So it's quite difficult to limit people to the question in hand without them kind of going off-piste and actually saying, great, you're engaging me on employee experience or the total rewards. Actually, it's all about the money. When we know from our research and from experience that the money is important as a hygiene factor, but it's not everything. And so the way to really understand the relative importance that people attach to different elements of the well-being program or the total rewards or the employee experience is to use a technique that's been used for many years very successfully by consumer research agencies, which is called conjoint analysis. And this forces people to make trade-off choices. So rather than me asking you, here's a list of things that we could invest in and things that we could give you, what would you prefer? We say, well, actually, if the choice was a little bit more money or a little bit less pension and no change to your annual leave entitlements, or less money, no change to your pension, but some more annual leave. Which of those two would you prefer, and how strongly? Right? A very simple example. You can see how you can introduce hard, tangible elements. You can introduce softer elements around well-being. Whatever it is that you want to examine, the relative importance that people in your organization attach to, you can plug into this type of exercise and understand. And what I'm going to share with you now is, and this is from a real client, they've given me permission to share this. They went through this exercise and they wanted a particular focus on benefits and well-being. And so these are some of the things that they tested in their organization to see how people would react to increasing the investment in certain areas. And they also included some traditional reward elements. What's fascinating is you see the reward elements, particularly around pay and pension, come way down the list. So people are saying, I would rather you invest in giving me better income protection, private GP services at work, a little bit more holiday, a bit more time in my personal developments, than more cash in my pocket. Now, if you simply went out to them with a survey or you asked them directly, I can guarantee you that the cash and the pension would be nearer the top, if not at the top. And yet, when you force people to make these trade-off choices, you often get a very different outcome. So they then used the insights from this conjoint analysis, forcing people to make these trade-offs, to put a case to the business to say, well, this is where we think we should be investing our dollars. And most of what they actually did to really shift the dial around employee engagement and improving satisfaction scores, as you can see, it wasn't around the money. It wasn't giving people bigger bonuses or salaries. It was fundamentally around well-being and some of the benefits that are very much linked to well-being. They introduced emotional well-being supports, financial well-being, on-site and virtual GP services. Because what they were able to do, back to the previous slide, was not only to see, each of these bars, by the way, shows how much more satisfied people would be if they made that change, but they assessed that relative to the cost to be able to identify what the impacts for money, which talked about the return on investment. So they went to the board and they said, these are the things that we'd like to do. That gave them a strong platform to make those changes. It also helped them to identify changes that they did not want to make. In a couple of areas. One was around annual leave, because they realized that the increase in perceived value that employees would attach wasn't justified by the cost of making that change. And executives had been particularly acted by wanting to give more people better car allowance. And that just didn't come through. People weren't interested in that, so they were able to redirect the available spend to the areas of biggest impact. So that's the second thing you can do, is to ask your employees and use that to build the business case. Then to Rich's point, how do you use technology to build a segment of one, to build a really personalized, individualized experience? Now, again, if we look at the world outside of the workplace, the likes of Apple and Amazon and Facebook and Google do this all the time, and they do this remarkably well, right? Let me just take a couple of examples. So Apple, for example, one of the best things about Apple is their ability to aggregate millions of sources of information all in one point, and you can access it all on your phone. Okay, what's so good about Google? It's simple to use. All you need is a search bar, and there's a powerful algorithm that sits underneath it. Facebook, a big part of the attraction of Facebook is the fact that the content is always changing. If every time you logged back onto Facebook, you saw the same thing that you'd seen a few hours ago, you wouldn't come back so frequently. Amazon, when you log on, it knows, welcome, Benjamin. Here are some products you were looking at last week. You might be interested in these things. People like you were also looking for these products, right? So how can we take, and this is all about driving, understanding consumer preferences to drive a behavioral outcome. How can we take these things in the context of delivering a unified, holistic well-being platform, or if you're looking at this more broadly across total rewards or the employee experience, to drive technology change? It's about doing those things that these organizations are doing, right? Number one, make it aggregated. Have everything in one place, accessible on my phone. So wherever I am, I've got all of the touch points. If I'm interested in well-being, I can dive into the various different programs in a holistic, joined-up way. If I'm interested in career, it will take me through to my career portal. If I want to get my latest payslip, it can take me through to that. So an umbrella that links all of your programs together, either on a deep dive well-being basis or across total rewards or the employee experience. Make it personalized. When I log on, I want to know programs that are relevant to me, right? So if you've got a piece of information on the front that says, hey, Benjamin, did you know there are 5 well-being programs that you're eligible to take part in? You're only availing yourself of 4 of them. Want to know what the other one is? Right? That's got my attention. It feels relevant to me, and it's more likely to drive my behavior to take action. And it's giving me an individualized experience. So, the look and the feel is all well and good. This is just a simple example that's focused on benefits. What this is all about, as Rich said earlier, is driving behavior change. Using consumer and an understanding of what it means to act and feel and respond to consumerism to drive behaviors. So we're looking to build a simplified experience. We're looking to have something that's forward-looking and not backward-looking. This isn't simply a reflection of this is what you've done over the last 12 months. It's forward-looking. Did you know, Benjamin, that in 2 months your free annual health check expires? Take action now. And it's more likely, therefore, to bring me in. I'm out of time, so I'll leave some rhetorical questions with you to consider, and feel free to come on and pick us up in the break if you'd like to ask us some questions. Are you building a unified experience? Do you understand what your people are looking for? Are you building a consumer-grade experience using all of these techniques that very successful organizations outside of the workplace use? And are you building that into your technology solutions to build a personalized individual experience for each and every employee? Thank you very much.